The Christmas Mystery, the 8th of December. On the 8th of December, Joachim was woken by Mama. She ruffled his hair and said, "Time to get up, Joachim. It's 7:30, and you start school early today." He drew himself up in bed. The first thing he thought of was the magic advent calendar hanging above his head. Mama seemed to read his thoughts. "Would you have time to open the advent calendar?" Joachim thought quickly. He thought so quickly that there was room for an awful lot of thoughts before Mama went on, "Aren't you going to open it? I'd like to see it too." No, thought Joachim. He couldn't open the magic advent calendar while Mama was watching. "I don't think you're properly awake yet," Mama went on. "Perhaps you'll let me open the advent calendar today." "No," said Joachim, so loudly and clearly that Mama jumped. "I'll wait till I come home from school. I'll have more time then." He jumped out of bed quickly to be quite certain Mama wasn't going to start opening the calendar. "Of course, you do just as you like," she said. She went out to the kitchen while Joachim got dressed. When Joachim got home from school, a man he didn't recognize was standing outside the garden gate. Since he didn't know the man, Joachim pretended he hadn't seen him. He opened the gate and closed it after him. "Is your name Joachim?" asked the stranger. Joachim stopped on the path that Papa had almost cleared of snow and turned towards the man. He was quite old. He looked kind, too. Joachim didn't like someone he didn't know to know his name, but he had to answer. "Yes," he said. "That's me." The man nodded. He came right up to the gate and leaned over it. He was wearing a green felt hat. "I thought so." He had rather an odd accent. Perhaps he wasn't Norwegian. "You've been given a fine advent calendar, haven't you?" Joachim gave a start. "How did you know that?" "A magic advent calendar," answered Joachim. "A magic advent calendar, yes. Price 75 ora. My name's John. I sell flowers at the market." Joachim stood stock still without saying anything. In his advent calendar he had read about people who had suddenly seen an angel. Now it was almost as if he was being visited by an angel itself. He knew this meeting with the flower seller was important, and he wanted to say something serious, but he only managed, "How did you know where I lived?" John chuckled to himself. "Good question, my boy," he said. "I often go into the bookshop, you see. I like it there. I wanted to hear where the old calendar had ended up. It was a good thing your father forgot his driving license. If he hadn't, it would have been much more difficult for me to find you. But I expect you to come down to me on the market sooner or later. Don't you think so?" Joachim nodded. He had thought of it. "Did you know there were some pieces of paper in the advent calendar?" he asked. "If there's anyone in the whole world who knows, it must be me." "Now you know too," said John. "Is it homemade?" "Completely homemade, yes, and very old. But that's an old story too." "Have you opened the calendar today?" Joachim shook his head. "I have to do it when Mama and Papa aren't looking, because I don't want them to know about the pieces of paper. I'm going to pack them up on Christmas Eve and put them under the Christmas tree." "That's a good idea," said John. "But what about yesterday, then? Didn't the pilgrims take a sheep with them from the old castle on Finn, and the angel ethereal had to say, 'Be not afraid,' to the sentries at the castle?" Joachim was always scared because John knew all about it. Did you make the magic advent calendar?" he asked. "Yes, and no." Joachim was afraid he might go, so he quickly asked another question. Did it all really happen, or did you make it up?" John looked serious. "It's all right to ask, but it isn't always so easy to answer." Joachim said, "I wondered whether Elizabeth in the magic advent calendar was the same as Elizabeth whose picture was in the bookshop." "So he told you about the old picture too," said John, sighing heavily. Well, I have nothing to hide any more. I'm too old for that now. But it isn't Christmas yet, so we'd better talk about Elizabeth another time. He took a step back. Zabet Tebas, he mumbled to himself. Joachim didn't understand that, but perhaps he hadn't been meant to hear it. Finally, John said, I must go now, but we'll meet again, for that old story links us human beings together. He walked away rapidly and soon disappeared. Joachim was annoyed that he hadn't had time to ask more questions. He ought to have asked whether the big calendar picture was gradually changing as he read the piece of paper. He hurried into the house and opened the door with a number 8 on it. Today there was a picture of a shepherd carrying a lamb on his shoulders. Joachim picked up the paper, smoothed it out carefully, and read. Jacob. On one of the last days of the year 1499 after Christ, 4 sheep, 1 shepherd, 1 king of the Orient, 1 angel, and a little girl from Norway flocked out of a boat that had brought them across the little belt to Jutland. Thank goodness! Exclaimed Caspar as they stepped onto land. Yes, it'll be a long time now before we have to do that again, said Joshua. The angel Ephiriel nodded. Verily I say unto you, that there will be only one more time before we get to Bethlehem. Elizabeth had no idea what they were talking about. Isn't it still terribly far to Bethlehem? She asked. Yes, indeed, said the angel. It is far, and many hundreds of years too. But there is only one more stretch of ocean to cross. That won't happen until we get to the Black Sea. The little procession came to a town at the inner end of a fjord. At one end of the town stood a large fortress. This town is called Kolding, and is in South Jutland, said the angel Ephiriel. It has been an important trading place for hundreds of years. The fortress is called Kolding's House, and the kings of Denmark have often lived here. The time is 1488 years after Christ's birth. Joshua struck the ground with his crook. To Bethlehem! To Bethlehem! They came to the top of a little ridge with fine views over the countryside. Fresh flowers were growing everywhere, so it must have been early summer. Elizabeth pointed down at the ground as she ran. Look at all the lovely wild flowers, she said. The angel nodded mysteriously. They are part of the glory of heaven that has strayed down to earth, he explained. You see, there's so much glory in heaven that it can easily spill over. Elizabeth pondered over the angel's words and hid them in her heart. Suddenly the shepherd stopped and pointed at the little flock of sheep. A lamb is missing. He needed to say no more, for all of them saw that the earth seemed to have swallowed up the lamb with the bell. Where is it? Exclaimed Elizabeth. The lambs are so charming with their white fleece that they're a delight to the eye, but they're almost uncontrollable, said Joshua. It doesn't always help to put a bell on them either. If I'm watching one lamb, the other will suddenly vanish. When I find the second lamb, all of a sudden, the first lamb will decide to leave the flock. Shepherding is a difficult job, and it's especially difficult to head a flock of sheep all the way to Bethlehem. As it is written, now I must find the other sheep. So I must leave the other sheep to look for the one lamb that is missing. Elizabeth felt her eyes fill with tears. But just then, a man appeared over the crest of the ridge. He was wearing clothes exactly like Joshua's, and on his shoulders he was carrying the lamb with the bell. He is one of us, said Ephiriel. The man put the lamb down at Elizabeth's feet. He held out his hand to Joshua and said, I am Jacob the shepherd, and the second of the shepherds of the field. Now I can help care for the flock that's going to Bethlehem. Elizabeth clapped her hands. Joshua struck the ground with his crook and said, To Bethlehem! To Bethlehem! The 2 shepherds ran behind the little flock, with Caspar the Black King, the angel Ephiriel, and Elizabeth behind them. As they were passing the old market town of Flensburg, the angel Ephiriel said, The time is 1402 years after the birth of Christ. We shall soon be crossing the frontier into Germany and diving down into the depths of the Middle Ages. Joachim stood, lost in thought. The angel Ephiriel had said that the wild flowers were a part of the glory of heaven that had strayed down to earth, because there's so much glory in heaven that it can easily spill over. Probably only a flower seller could write something like that. He didn't tell Mama and Papa that John had visited him. If he told them about that, he would have to give away the secret of the scraps of paper too. Joachim now had so many secrets to keep that he felt his head could split at any moment. Bye for now.